paper versus software, or in other words, old school versus new school. Welcome to the Steelo podcast, the podcast where we share stories, insights, and business advice from our experience in the steel industry and behind the scenes here at Steelo. Hosted by our incredible team, we look forward to bringing you more episodes filled with stories, thoughts, and industry insights from all levels of our business. Enjoy this episode and don't forget to follow wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's topic is about comparing the old school tools, i.e. paper, versus high-tech software. Now, obviously, we all want to make progress and there's a lot of innovation and we look at IT as being the solution for everything. But is that true? Now, obviously, I'm a big fan of innovation, and the reason I started Steelo was to innovate the industry. So push the boundaries and just find new, better ways of improving efficiency and reliability. So we actually, as a company, we not only use a lot of software, we've also even developed our own software. We were looking at an ERP package, Enterprise Resource Planning. It's a software that basically sorts out, one could say, all the business's problems, or in other words, incorporates every single aspect of running the business. So ERP systems have quite a lot of modules like the CRMs, customer relationship management, finance, quoting, stock levels, deliveries, and a few other stuff that basically cover the whole company. Now, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that IT software or any kind of software is the solution. Like, there's definitely a piece of software that will solve our problems. And quite often paper is being neglected or even treated as old school, whereas actually I would say, and this might be a bit controversial, that paper is better than software. Now, the reason why I say that is because paper accepts everything. Whatever you want to write on it, it will accept it. You can make immediate changes. You can alter it, you can cross things out, you can move it across a board, you can attach it wherever you want it to be in that moment. You can create something called a project Kanban, which effectively means you have different columns that show a different status, and you can move a placard, a piece of paper, whatever it is, a job card across a board depending on the status. You can mark things there, you can have initials, so it is very, very flexible and adaptive. Software, on the other hand, as weird as it sounds, is actually very rigid. Now, I know everyone claims that this software is flexible and so on, but the truth is that software isn't, because software relies on a code. So someone has sat down once and sort of wrote down the algorithm or the process that it has to follow, and then someone else, or maybe the same person, then wrote the code around it. So software is great for repetitive tasks, something that has already been proven, but it is useless when it comes to amendments. We ourselves, because we wrote our own software using an external company, we've found out firsthand how difficult it is to change a thing within the software. Sometimes a thing that just looks very simple, like, oh, let's just change the price from excluding VAT to including VAT. Now, that just sounds like one click of a button to change, but it's not, because starting from the database, it actually has to refer to a different location within the matrix there. Then that quite often has a knock-on effect on all the other areas of the same software. So one thing that just seems like a trivial change sometimes is a massive job for the programmers, and quite often there are mistakes or bugs. So basically the system crashes after these kind of updates. So that's why software isn't the easiest, and actually it's very, very difficult to create any changes or just sort of introduce some kind of features. Paper, on the other hand, you've got a new idea in this moment in time, few seconds later it's already done. You just cross things out and you change it. So I do believe that when it comes to new ideas, like if you want to introduce a new process or a new procedure or something, start with pen and paper. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that, oh, this is so old school and this just won't work. No, just go for it. Grab a piece of paper and just create whatever you want. The other trap that people sometimes fall into is even if they go down the paper route, they first go onto, let's say, Excel or Word, and they create a template. And it is okay, but you're already creating a rigid foundation, because if you introduce it once, you then have a virtual file stored somewhere. So the problem might be that you might have access to that file, but no one else. So, for example, you introduce a new, let's say, timesheet, and before you go down the IT software route, you first want to try it out on a piece of paper. You could just manually draw a table with some headings and titles for people to fill out, or you can go into Excel and create that table, a proper layout, and then print it out, which is fine. It looks more professional, I agree, but if the first week goes by and you haven't printed enough copies, then people will run out of it, and without you even knowing it, they might just ditch the whole idea of using those timesheets. So that is the trap when it comes to putting things on files, computer files. But again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying stick with paper, I'm just saying that paper is the best to start with. If you've got an idea somewhere in your mind, just grab a piece of paper and start using it. And only once you fine-tune it, and trust me, there'll be a lot of items that will cross out and amend and change and upgrade, and only then start digitizing it. Now, even when we go back to the beginnings of Steelo, we had a motherboard, that's what we called it, basically a whiteboard, magnetic whiteboard, with every day of the week, 2 weeks in advance. So we had 2 weeks fixed, and we rolled over. So we just marked which board is the current week, and then we always had 1 week ahead spare. And we just started with these basic placards. And it is amazing how they developed over time. And I remember each time we made a change, I kept a copy for myself. And then a few years later, I've got it somewhere in my folders because I do like to keep stuff that make history. I compared the final version to one of the first ones. And I just couldn't believe it. Why couldn't we, at the very beginning, come up with the final version? It took so many years to develop it until we reached a point where indeed there weren't changes made at all. So there are things that come up later on. They are not the things that you can just sit behind a desk and sort of envision initially. Things like, I don't know, someone forgetting some bolts. So then you think, okay, well, it would be good to add somewhere a box that says the driver has actually loaded the bolts as well, and things like that. And they only come when you actually run the business and these mistakes creep in. Once we achieved the final version, we then worked on Google Sheets, and Google Sheets are great because you can have them open on multiple devices with multiple users having access live. And that was a game changer for us because suddenly we were able to replace that job ticket in a digital form without paying too much for any software, without committing to software. Because the other problem with ERP packages or any other software is that once you go for a package, you then go crazy in terms of using it and uploading all the data, and you're almost hooked. You can't backtrack from it after a month or two of using it. So that's the trap of committing to a software too soon. Whereas we had the luxury of first dry running it. Google Sheets doesn't cost anything. We did pay a small fee to someone to write the macros because we did want some form of automation. And I think the thing that made the difference, until this day, one of our guys is responsible for systems, he keeps mentioning it, that the game changer was down to having an extra sheet with comments. So the end users, if they found something wasn't working or they asked for a feature or something, they would go into that sheet, add their name and the description of what they would like, and next to it there was this comment where I was actually personally overseeing it, and when I saw something interesting or worth implementing, I obviously discussed that with the person that raised it, and I then implemented it. So within the first few days we made rapid progress. We very quickly were able to not only work on something live, but also have live feedback from end users, and that is invaluable, which meant that we very quickly made progress and ended up with something that worked well. After a while, probably a few months, when it worked perfectly fine and there weren't any requests for changes, that is when we actually approached a IT company and wrote the system based on the free or almost free Google Sheets. And this saved a lot of money and time. The IT company, they could also, well, they obviously were provided with access. They could see exactly what we want. And also, there were some flaws, things that just couldn't work in Google Sheets because obviously it also has its limitations. Therefore, we had a clear understanding of what we need to be added, what features we need that Google Sheets is lacking. And that really sped up the whole process of developing our new software. So paper might be perceived as old school, but trust me, till this day, I still use paper. And a good example, a recent example, error logs. We have always kept track of our errors because that is part of our learning and how we improve our service. In the past, it used to be in paper form only, like just these folders. Each department had their own error log, and once a month we used to go through it during our company meetings and just revise what happened, why it happened, and whether there's a system solution possible so that this mistake won't happen again. And all this is fine, but with technology moving forward, we also felt that this needs an upgrade, so we put everything online. And interestingly, when it is online, even with the best access in the world, for some reason there's a barrier to access it. And even within our company now, everyone has access to a smart sheet because we use smart sheets for it, to that error log, but for some reason it just isn't used. And I say some reason, but I actually know what the reason is. The reason is that it is just a few too many clicks away from being accessible. So I did review our error logs. It took me probably 3 weeks or so because I was trying to work out what's the best way forward. And I went back to good old paper. So what I did is, instead of preparing a template with the right columns and so on, literally just a piece of paper, manually drawn table just with the columns and then the headings, and that's it. Plugged it on the main board in the sales office, and everyone has access to it, and when there's a mistake they just write down the date, the job number and the issue, only using a few words just so it doesn't take too much time, and the final column just says that it has been sorted. And it's nice to see that it actually works. It's so much easier. You just have to stand up, grab a pen and write it. Even though technically everyone has access to the online version, the paper in the office is something that just simply works. Now, there are some companies that have introduced a zero paper policy, so they decided they're just going to get rid of paper entirely. And as far as I'm aware, many of them, if not all, but I don't have data to support it, but I know firsthand that many of them have backtracked. There's something magical in paper. As you probably know yourself, there is a massive difference between reading something on the screen versus reading on paper, and that's why many people with all the wonderful tools and devices available, they still prefer to print things on paper. Obviously, we don't want to waste paper, so there has to be a fine balance between wastage and convenience. But if, for instance, we make a mistake in fabricating our steel because a piece of paper hasn't been printed out, then the global result in terms of CO2 will be far worse than actually printing the piece of paper in the first place. So that's why we just have to weigh it against probably the worst case scenario and how much it would actually then result in CO2, because we would have to go to site to collect it, so to travel CO2, and then refabrication, which is either cutting, grinding, and then re-welding. So that's why, printing paper isn't great, but the fallout might be much worse. The other thing that we as a company are obliged to do as part of our certification, UKCA certification, is we need traceability. And in our working environment, having fancy touch screens and other iPad devices just wouldn't work for us. They'll be damaged almost immediately. So we still have to print paper in a paper form or the fabrication drawings. And then on those drawings, each process is sort of signed by the person that carried it out. So as you can see, I'm a big fan of software, but equally a big fan of paper. You just have to find what works for you in the current situation or which issue you're faced with, and just find the right tool for it. When it comes to software, on the other hand, things are changing very, very quickly, and even if you commit to a piece of software now, within a few years it might be obsolete because there will be something else replacing it. And I find that we're having a bit of software diarrhea when it comes to the whole world, or where we are in this moment in time. Everyone seems to have the best solution in the form of software, and it's all over the place. Like, running a business now just means having access to probably 10, maybe 15 different pieces of software, and it is very, very difficult managing where you store what piece of information, how you access it, levels of access to users, and so on. It is becoming very, very troublesome, and so it'll be interesting to know whether you share our pain in terms of the different software that is rolled out left, right, centre. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Like I said, we share our inside knowledge, not only strictly related to steel, but in general as to what it's like to run a small, medium-sized business. Remember to sign up for our podcast so you don't miss out on any future information that we share with you, and also please go back to all the previous podcasts, as there's a lot of golden nuggets that you can take away and introduce or implement in your business. Thank you.